Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to get underway. This is the session on energy policy. What are the goals? If you were looking for the other one, renewable and non-renewable resources, that's a different room. You may leave now. Or if you suddenly realized you came into the room that I'm in, you may also leave now. This morning's session, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Jim Marshall. I am a Senior Policy Fellow at the Johnson Shramba Graduate School of Public Policy. We're going to talk this morning about the goals of energy policy, and I'd like to focus a great deal on that. You will notice as we go that I will try to keep bringing it back to that. A lot of the discussion around energy policy, well, any policy, tends, I think, to focus on means and methods and not on the goals. And we need to start, I think, with the goals in order to work towards appropriate means and methods. This morning we have with us some very helpful speakers. Denise Amiot, who is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Science and Technology Museums. So I worry whenever anybody from a museum is present, because I could end up in one, but and also, as well as that, like that's not enough to do, the President of the Institute of Public Administration of Canada, IPAC, and brings with her a vast wealth of experience in policy development, including energy issues, so we look forward to her discussion. James Meadowcroft, Professor, School of Public Policy and Administration, and the Department of Political Science at Carleton University. So we got two people from Ottawa to come today. And Guy Bruce, who is the Vice President of Planning, Environment, and Regulatory Affairs at our own SaskPower. Thank you, Guy, for being here. We look forward to their presentations. The format for today's discussion, we will have presentations from each of our speakers. There'll be about 20 minutes. Then we will open the floor for discussion and welcome questions from all of you. I remind you that this is being videotaped and recorded, so I encourage, especially when we get to the question period, that you use the microphone. There's one there. That's it, I guess. So that means only one of you can ask a question at a time. I'd like to take a second to thank very much our sponsors for today's event, the Ministry of Energy and Resources, Innovation Saskatchewan, the University of Saskatchewan, and the University of Regina, as well as the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for their generous support of this event. And let's see if we can make sure that those gracious and generous sponsors get their money's worth. With that, I'd like to start by introducing Denise Amiot to talk to us about issues in energy policy. Thank you, Denise.
Good morning, bonjour tout le monde. I thought I would start by an ad because if we talk about energy, I'll talk about something very practical. I have a BlackBerry torch and I forgot my charger at home, unfortunately. So if any one of you have a charger, I would really appreciate it because I'm running out of juice. Just put it at the other end. Just to reassure Jim, in our museums, we also look at new technology, so we don't only look at old things. My presentations will be a bit different. I will not talk about policy or policy development, but more about energy literacy. And what is interesting in the panel that we heard this morning, both Ken Campbell and Bob Page both talk about the importance of energy literacy and about the public. And so that's why I thought, and when I spoke with the organizer, I told them, look, I will not be talking about policy, so I should be in the panel talking about public engagement and confidence. And they said, no, we want you at this one. So I said, okay, so I'm listening to the organizer. And so basically what I will talk about is how we can help Canadians to have a balance and inform discussions and know about energy. Because as you know, everybody is talking about energy, no matter who they are, but people in general do not know what they are talking about because energy is not known, it's full of myths. So where is the clicker? Okay, sorry, so basically, what I will talk to you about is a 6-year initiative that will start officially in June. And it is an initiative that is a pan-Canadian initiative that we are spearheading at the museums. And it touches production, it touches distribution, it touches consumption of energy. So basically all aspects. And what is important, it's all about connecting people together and sharing information. And and also changing the behavior. So we will, there are some slides I will not present, so I apologize for that. So basically there will be 3 themes that will be discussed during this 6-year pan-Canadian initiatives. The first one is, I call it Energy 101, or dispelling the myths about energy. Second one is to showcase new technology, because as you know, Canada is very, very advanced with respect to new technology, no matter what is the source, basically, of energy. And the third one is really to change the behavior of citizens in relations to energy, because often they forget, they do not know that, in fact, they are the largest consumer of energy. So I will not mention why energy, not the importance of energy, the need for energy literacy. When you look at statistics like that, you realize that, something needs to be done on energy. And I'll just do an aparté, if I may, here. Often I go, in the last 2 years, I've been often to conferences on energy, and what I'm realizing, it's always the same people talking to the same people. It's always energy people, and at each of those conferences, we talk about, we need to talk to the public. We need to talk to the public. So basically, that's what this initiative is all about. My request to you today, I have a number of requests, and I've added a 5th one, in fact. I need to know about success stories that we could share with Canadians. We want to know the stories. And even if they have not been successful, if they have, you tried something and it didn't work, we need to know, because we'll learn from that. The second thing is that if you have any artifacts or prototypes, I know universities often have those, or companies have those. We would love to have them, to showcase them in the exhibitions. The third one is really, if you know about any associate that we could have with respect to this energy initiatives. It could be a research center, it could be science center, it could be universities. Right now we're doing something with Carleton University, because they have a building that will be the most advanced with respect to energy efficiency that they are doing, so they will become a showcase. There's a college in Nova Scotia that contacted me shortly, and they said, look, we are also building something that is one of the most advanced. So we need to know about those, because they will be mapped on a map of Canada, and we're looking at the possibility of doing virtual exhibitions of all of those. And the last one, we're looking at, of course, sponsors. So if there's anybody from private sector here, I know universities and it's like museums, you're running after money like me, so I won't ask universities for that. And I'm looking for representatives from Saskatchewan because we have created a national advisory committee that represents all sectors, whether private sector, NGO, academia, and we are covering the country, and we have Manitoba, Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, Maritimes, but we have nobody from Saskatchewan, and I'd love to have someone from Saskatchewan, especially from the private sector, because our academia is very well represented right now. The components, in fact, it's what I'm talking about today has never been done in the world. Never. Ever. We've checked on not even on a different subject. So we think we can really make a difference not only in Canada but in the world with respect to energy. Why is it unique in the world? It's because it's the first time that there will be something that will be done at the same time during a 6-year period in different parts of a country and all linked together through a framework. We talked about an energy framework, so now we're talking about an energy partnership framework. So there will be, of course, 3 exhibitions at each of our museum in Ottawa, and I will talk about each of them after. And we are also partnering with a number of science centers, museums, research institutes across the country, and there will be a series of programs and activities that I will mention. So what are we talking about? So with respect to this partnerships framework, so there is our corporation, there is the National Advisory Committee that I've mentioned earlier, and there's a number of associations that are part of this, whether we talk about CAP, whether we talked about Canadian Gas Associations, Canadian Wind Energy Associations, and so on. So I won't cover this. With respect to our venue partners, those are the people that we have been discussing with so far. And as I said earlier, this is officially starting in June. We're talking, for those of you that are from Regina, we're talking now with the Science Center in Regina, as well as the Western Development Museum. And they are very interested in partnering with us. And what is important for us is really to ensure that we have something that is pan-Canadian. What is interesting is that in some cases, some people will do something on energy. In other cases, they will take a traveling exhibition. In other cases, they will take a kiosk that will talk about energy literacy. So it varies depending on their needs. So here are examples basically of what we're talking about with those different aspects. So first one, traveling exhibitions. I will mention the one that we have later. We're talking about edukits. Those are literally suitcases that go in the school system. We're talking about a website that will talk about all what our different partners are doing to share information. Because one of my biggest frustration has been so far, every week I discover about someone that I should have known about before. And it's very, very frustrating because there's not a single source of where everything is happening with respect to energy literacy. So we want to help solve that issue. We are looking at a teacher training as well during the summer as a pilot in July for elementary teachers, because that's where there is an issue right now. Elementary teachers, they just don't know how to teach science and technology, and we will focus specifically on energy. We're looking at kiosks that I will talk about, and energy literacy symposium. This is something we want to do, in fact, in about 3 years from now, 3-4 years from now, and to do different regional symposium and a national symposium to look at what did we learn so far, what do we need to adapt, and what can we share together. So one of the things that is the first one that is coming out, in fact, from, I think you see the woodwork, is a kiosk, and we're using materials from very, very different sources right now, whether national associations or private sector companies, videos, and so on. And it is a tactile kiosk, a tactile screen, I should say, and there will be about 30 kiosks that will be around in the country. Right now, I'm telling you, right now, we only have money for 6 kiosks, and we're looking at different provinces to help us to put other kiosks in different places across the country. Because it's a good way to be able to have information. We're looking at putting some of those in airports as well. Oh. One of the second thing that in fact is already starting to circulate in a few weeks is a traveling exhibitions. We're aiming at 5 traveling exhibitions right now. The first one is on electricity. It's already done. It was done, in fact, by a museum in Sherbrooke, and this will circulate across the country. In fact, it's coming to the Science Center in 2012, so you will be able to see it here in Regina. And what we are hearing right now is that people are telling us you should do another traveling exhibitions, but on the north and energy, because they are facing very different problems, and especially the northern parts of all the provinces in Canada. We're also asked to prepare now another exhibition on gas, because people are saying there are so many misconceptions with respect to gas, especially shale gas. I don't know about the West, but I certainly know that in Quebec, people really do not understand what shale gas is all about. And people are asking us, maybe you should do one on energy efficiency as well. And on that, we're saying no, because we are saying we should do energy efficiency in each of the exhibitions, basically. So this is the one on electricity that I was talking about. And you can see already the different places where it will be circulating. Airport installations, I've already talked about that. The only thing I will say here is that we launch this initiatives to announce it with both Minister Goodyear and Minister Paradis at the World Energy Congress. And at the time, there were many countries that were interested. There were, in fact, 4 countries that came to see us after, and they said, look, we want to be part of this. This is really unusual. We've never heard about something that is of that scale and so ambitious and so important for a country. One of the things that you may be familiar with, the Public Works organize what we call the Canada Pavilion Program. And it comes here at the Saskatoon X, I think, the exhibition. And it goes across the country. So the kiosks that I have shown to you earlier will be at the Saskatoon X, and they are very, very interested in that. Couple of national partners that are developing right now. Some of them may interest you more. One of them especially is with the Royal Canadian Geographic Society. Next June, we will launch an energy photo contest. So people will be able to participate in this contest, and then we're looking at doing a traveling exhibitions of the winners of that contest. We're looking at doing a special issue on energy. So again, if some of you would have stories, would have things to share, we would like to know about it, because it could be of interest to this initiative. This is the Canada Pavilion Program. It gives you an overview of what I was talking about. The educates, right now we were asked, we have one for the elementary on energy that is circulating, and we just completed one also for high school, and we decided to put it virtual as well. So it is available virtually, so any teachers across the country can download it. And we are canvassing people right now to see on what other theme should we have something. Should it be on gas, for example, to accompany the traveling exhibition? Should it be on the north? What is it that is the most important right now? Distance learning, I mentioned teacher earlier with respect to the Summer Institute. What we decided to do is that in order to ensure that teachers don't just come for, a week and that's it, we forget about them, each month after they will be supported and they will be able to exchange together so that they will be able to pursue their learning. I think I will stop this. I will just complete by this, saying that in our 3 museums, we will showcase energy, but from very, very different angle. For example, at Science and Technology, we will cover from nuclear to solar, including oil sands. And we will talk about the different aspects, as I said, production, distribution, consumption, and we will also talk about, of course, both renewable and non-renewable. What is interesting also is that aviation and space, what we will be doing, we will talk about, we discovered something that is very important. Right now, their footprint, they predict that it will double in 20 years because, in fact, the number of airplanes will increase tremendously. So because of that, they're looking at different innovations, airframes that are lighter, biofuel, and so on, solar panels on the wings. And so those are the things we will be showing, as well as asking people, showing to people what people thought airplanes would look like 50 years ago, and in fact what they are looking like. And because 50 years ago everybody thought that everybody would have an airplane beside their house, which in fact didn't materialize. And with respect to agriculture, we will talk about the fact that energy in fact means work on a farm. And this one will be an energy park where we will showcase different plants. And what is interesting is that we're looking now for a sponsor to help us to fund a virtual exhibition so that people could sit no matter where they are in the country from their kitchen or their living room and see the different exhibitions that are taking place in the country, whether it's the Glenbow Museums, whether it's the Yukon that is showcasing tidal energy, not Yukon, but geothermal energy in Yukon, or the Atlantic that is showing tidal energy. So I will stop here, and I'll just finish by this. So the outcomes are quite obvious. We want to raise awareness and also provide a forum for dialogue, because we think that that's what is the issue. People don't know, and they don't have the chance to learn and then discover, oh, it's not what I thought. So if you have any questions at the lunchtime, I will be pleased to answer them.
Thank you, Denise. Well, that's certainly important work being undertaken there, and I think it'll be very important to inform Canadians about these issues, and thank you for that very much. Next, we have James Meadowcroft to speak to us about a number of issues around sustainability and energy transitions. Thanks, James.
Hi, my name is James Meadowcroft. I'm a professor at Carleton University. My field of work is governance for sustainable development. So I'm interested in all the ways in which government is adjusting to the kind of increasing importance of environment and sustainable development type issues. And a lot of my work actually is now on energy, and particularly because of its link to climate change. And I'm a member of the Photovoltaic Innovation Network, and I also do a lot of work on carbon capture and storage, among other things with Carbon Management Canada, which some of you may know, based in Calgary, which is a big research project around low-emission fossil fuels. So today my talk is really going to focus on three kind of ideas, if you like. The idea of policy integration, the idea of sustainable energy, and the idea of transitions. And I guess what I'm suggesting is that those three ideas are important if we're thinking about this kind of energy thingy that people are talking about. So if we're thinking about coordination, about some sort of idea of a long-term energy, you can call it strategy or Bob prefers framework, whatever, all these three ideas I would like to suggest are important in that context. So this is the outline of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start by talking about integration. I'm going to move on to sustainable development, sustainable energy, a little bit about climate change and the energy revolution, and then focus on what I call a transition perspective. So we're starting about this idea of integrating, and I guess what I first want to do is say that this idea of integrating is actually kind of complicated because there are a lot of different things that we might want to integrate. Now, I'm going to start by just saying, let's look at all these dimensions. I'm not necessarily going to suggest we can do it, or even it would be wise to try to do it all at one time. But let's look at some of these. So first of all, we have the question, which is supposedly the theme, I guess, of this session, which is the idea of goals, or if you like, societal objectives. So here we can kind of think about what are we trying to achieve when we make a framework or a strategy around energy. So in here you'd put things like, well, I guess affordable energy, clean energy, reliable energy, energy security. We want energy to contribute to societal development, economic development. There are trade issues. There are quite a lot of things when you really get down into it. But the idea, presumably, is that energy policy wouldn't just do like one thing. It would do a lot of different things, which together would not be kind of conflicting, but would in some sense be integrated. So what else? So then we could say, well, there's something like production and consumption. You could include transportation in the middle, linking together the production and consumption. But there are different aspects, obviously, to energy policy. Canada is a big energy producer, but we also, every individual and every business and activity consumes energy and uses energy. How are those linked? And it's not clear that obviously you can't just change one side of those equations. If change comes along, it's going to affect both. A third one is the question of sectors. Energy actually is used or is integral to each of the key economic sectors in the country. So transport, we use fossil fuels essentially for transport, but it's important. Housing is one of the biggest, housing and office space, space heating, lighting is one of the biggest consumers of energy. But think also about agriculture. Modern agriculture is unthinkable without fossil fuels for running machinery and also for fertilizer inputs and so on. Construction, you can go on and on. So integration has to mean, in some sense, thinking also about how energy is used in the different parts of the economy. Another thing is spatial and political scales. Now, I think the first roundtable kind of engaged with this when we're talking about federal and provincial. Whoops. But of course, municipal is also very important. Canadians live in municipalities. The structure of cities, the way they're organized affects energy use. And of course, there's the international scale as well. So all those scales impact energy use, energy consumption, production. And so in a sense, you need to integrate them into one's thinking about energy. And then, of course, there are temporal scales. We worry about, well, is there going to be a brownout in the next 2 or 3 years? Or we worry about energy planning in the relative short term. I mean, for people running power systems, they worry about tomorrow and next week for power consumption. But also, we have much longer scales. And in fact, as was already emphasized, capital turnover and so on, you're talking about decades often in the energy sector. The time it will take to deal with issues like climate change, you're talking in half a century or even longer. So how do you integrate thinking about those different sorts of scales? And the last one, you can think of others, but the last one I put here was the question about experts and publics. A lot of decision-making about energy is made by experts, but the public also gets a say, and often they have a veto say, where there is a public reaction or protest against something that the experts decided or we know is best. So there's something about how, in thinking about energy and energy decision-making, what's the appropriate balance between those two groups in order to make a kind of sound path forward. So I guess the last things I'd say here is that thinking about integrating all this kind of stuff into some sort of big plan, which we could decide in 2 or 3 years, and then we'd have it done, is in a sense completely utopian. In fact, there's a whole tradition in public policy about how if we could only integrate everything into a big plan, our cities wouldn't be a mess, the economy would thrive. And obviously, the real world doesn't work like that. Our cognitive powers are bounded. We face all sorts of pressures to make a decision on this problem now, and it can't wait until we finish the whole plan. And of course, the world is changing so that we always have imperfect information and there's uncertainty. So in one sense, we can say, well, actually, forget it, because you can't do it. But I think what we realize is that we kind of have to do some of it. That's to say, try and pick some elements that are the most important and achieve some integration. And I think also it's the idea of seeing that integration can be done in a plan, but then it's also done in practice in the real world. So it becomes like an iterative process where some things can be dealt with now, other things become more acute and are dealt with later, and so on. Okay, so that was what I wanted to say about the idea of integration. So I'm going to move on now. This I'll go through relatively rapidly about sustainable development and sustainable energy. Well, I'm just suggesting that it's kind of accepted that sustainable development represents a broad societal goal. It's supposed to integrate, the idea is to integrate economic, environmental, and social advance. And there are a series of normative ideas associated with sustainability, like protecting the environment and justice between generations and within generations, and paying interest to the world's poor, and so on. So, but a key aspect that is not always kind of sufficiently clear is that sustainable development actually implies not just kind of combining all these things and muddling along. There really is an idea that there's something wrong with the development trajectory we have. It's brought us a lot of good things, but also it's clear that it can't go on in the way that it's going without severe problems. And if we look, you know, in a kind of very briefly, what have we accomplished in the developed countries? Environmental regulation and cleaner production has done enormous amount in cleaning up water pollution, air pollution, making national parks and things like that. But if you look at the really big kind of global problems like climate change, like biodiversity, like chemical releases, these sorts of, and the stress on biological resources, these pressures are going on and continuing and have grown over the past 30 years and will grow much more over the next 30 or 40 years as key developing countries begin to develop the lifestyle that we have here, but do it on the scale of additional hundreds of millions of people. So essentially, there is a need to radically reduce the imposed environmental burden. And climate change is important, but in a way it's only the first one of these issues that is biting. The nitrogen cycle, and there are other issues where there are problems looming in the decades ahead. So I guess what I suggest is that we should approach, one of the ways that we should frame discussions of energy policy is from the perspective of sustainable development. And I just suggest that a simple way of thinking about it is sustainable energy is energy that contributes to a sustainable development trajectory. That's to say, it contributes to social advance of our society that is congruent with sustainable development. This we covered. And so energy policy should not just integrate those three things, but in some way, in the long term, should modify our development trajectory so it isn't basically on a collision course with the planetary life support systems. So what are the implications then of climate change in this energy revolution? I guess the first thing to emphasize is the scale of the challenge. Most of the scientific of course there's debate, but assessments seem to agree that over the course of the next half century in the rich countries, we more or less should try to decarbonize the energy system. That means completely decarbonizing the electricity system, and it probably means shifting transport off of fossil fuels by mid-century or not long thereafter. And even the IEA now talks explicitly for the need for an energy revolution. Now, obviously, when I'm talking about saying decarbonization, I don't imply that we can't use fossil fuels. What I'm talking about is a carbon-emitting fuel system. So this implies, obviously, major changes to the way we produce and consume energy today. Innovation on both the social and the technological side. And I guess to emphasize here that there are many ways to do this. It's not that there's kind of one green energy solution that is lurking there for the mid-century or something like this. There are many possible pathways, but it's the question of combining different sources of energy and different ways of consuming energy. And here there's a question also about social choice, which pathways we want to go down. And I guess my main takeaway on this point is that the main obstacles are related to culture, institutions, practices, distributional conflicts, and not technology, which is not to say that technology isn't important and we need new technology. But we can develop new technology and we can apply new technology. But to do so, we have to deal with cultural, political, distributional issues. And historically, these things have been much harder for human societies to deal with than the technological innovation as such. I don't have time really to go in this. I think the point has been made that there is a strong tendency towards path dependence in energy system. Once you've built a large-scale energy system, nuclear power economy, or it doesn't really matter what it is, you've invested huge amounts of money, you have technological capacity, you have training, you have laws that are adjusted to this system. It's very hard to shift off that path. Hence, it's important to think when you make investments and decisions, is this opening options or closing options? Progress in other countries, I guess Bob Page, I think, alluded to that in the opening session. There are a number of countries internationally who really are pushing on this issue. That's not to say they don't have all sorts of problems and acute debates. The UK is a good example. They have had a series of energy white papers that have identified kind of two key issues, climate change and energy security as the kind of overriding things. They have a whole raft of programs trying to deal with the long-term decarbonization of the economy. But of course, they've got all sorts of concrete problems and issues. How much do we commit to nuclear power? How much do we commit to carbon capture and storage, and so on? The specific problems don't go away because you have a big framework, but the big framework can maybe help you incrementally chip away at these big problems. Sweden, I should say, is distinctive in being the first country to explicitly say that they are trying to basically end fossil fuel dependence within 20 years. Well, it's down to about 17 years now. And finally, this should be seen as an opportunity agenda and not just an agenda of kind of responding to an environmental problem. Okay. So I'm going to skip this because you all know it, but this is just some of the peculiarities of Canada. Our energy resources, very carbon-intensive industrial structure, varied resources, region to region, policy fragmentation, energy integration in North America, policy paralysis for more than 15 years on climate change, and a continuing policy vacuum and uncertainty, largely because of what's happening in the US, but not just. Okay, so the third kind of big idea that I wanted to raise was the idea of what I call a transition approach. And really the idea is that we have in our society quite a few persistent problems that don't seem to go away despite chipping away on the policy side for maybe decades. And if we look historically, we can see that there have been these large socio-technical transitions. I think Bob mentioned the kind of coming of steam power and the coal and so on, where you can look at a series of these transitions. Something as simple as the change from sailing ships to steamships, which now we just take for granted. But for the people living then, it wasn't so clear that those early clunky steamships would win and beat those those sailing ships. So today well, there are many features if we look at examples of historical transitions, including the fact that there's a period of a lot of uncertainty at the beginning about which way it's going to go. Finally, a settling down on a dominant technology. Think about the automobile. Between 1890, say, and 1910, 1915, there was everything existed. There were electric cars, steam cars, biofuel cars, oil cars. They had 3 wheels, 6 wheels, 8 wheels, two wheels. Finally, it settled down. 4 wheels, internal combustion engine, and it stayed more or less the same for 100 years. We got window wipers and CD players and stuff. Of course, the engines got better and more efficient, but it was an incremental improvement on an existing technology. Here, we're talking, when we're talking about a change in energy, the energy world over the coming century, we're talking about more than that. So we need some policies and techniques in order to orient and accelerate such transitions. One key thing is the idea of having long-term visions and pathways. Notice visions is plural. So one vision might be we electrify transport. That'd get rid of a lot of greenhouse gases, and we do CCS on the fossil fuels we use to generate the electricity. That's a vision, a very short, detailed one, not very detailed one. But there are multiple visions that are possible. But thinking about those visions helps us bring home today when we make policies some of the possible implications of those policy choices. And you can also work on pathways towards those visions and what their implications would be and what policies would be robust across several pathways. The idea of encouraging experiments in order to learn the boundaries of the possible within the existing system, and managing it as a portfolio of experiments, almost like an investment portfolio. Now we do experiments, but they're quite isolated. And a focus on innovation and those that are really trying to push the boundary. I guess this relates back to the point earlier about barriers. Social innovation is easily as important as technological innovation. And in fact, the social innovation is needed in order to encourage the technological innovation. Distributional issues are critical and can act as a barrier to change. So you need to think about side payments, equalization payments, buying off some groups, retraining workers from an industry that's in decline, all sorts of issues there. Living with turbulence and uncertainty. Think about the automobile industry at the moment. Again, we're entering a period where it's not clear in 30 years what cars are what they're really going to look like. Are they going to be fuel cell vehicles? Are they going to be hybrid electric vehicles? All electric vehicles? Are they going to run on natural gas? They could be doing all of these things. How do you think for the future? How do you plan your policy around an auto industry when it's not clear where the powertrain is going? That's kind of self-explanatory, and I think I said it already. And then finally, I just want to come back to this thing. Despite the fact that we'll arrive at nice principles that we all agree and so on, finally, somebody's going to have to make choices, and they're going to be hard choices, and everybody isn't going to agree. And we're going to decide, well, we are going to build a nuclear power plant, or we aren't. And that decision will have long-term consequences many decades after the people who've made it have not retired. You can say, let's keep the options open. But at some point, you have to either break the ground and build it or not break the ground and build it. And that's where, if you like, the responsibility for political decisions comes into play. So I think that's about it. So my conclusions are quite kind of straightforward. Integration is important, but it's not achieved just by planning, but also iteratively, by getting into the habit of doing those plans and then revisiting afterwards. What were the consequences of our decisions? How has the world changed? Let's do the exercise again. And by practical coordination. Sustainable energy provides an integrating theme that you can bring together these different goals within that framework. And finally, that energy policy should be framed in dynamic terms of a long-term transition that we'll be going through over the next 3, 4, 5 decades, and not just thought about incrementally. How do we solve the immediate problems that are most pressing on our plate? Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Guy? Next.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Our president of SaskPower, Robert Watson, is attending a CEA forum in Vancouver today. All the CEOs of power utilities across Canada are getting together and probably discussing some of the same issues that we're talking about here today. My presentation, now, how do we, this is it here, okay. I'm just going to talk a little bit about SaskPower. There's quite a few people here who have not grown up in Saskatchewan as I have, so I thought a little bit of an intro to what SaskPower is all about might be appropriate. I'm going to talk about what we're doing today to meet growth in the province and some of the operational challenges. I come from the perspective of a power utility where, yes, we do worry about how we're going to meet the demand today and tomorrow and for the next hour. That's part of my background, so I bring that perspective to the table, and then options for the future. And I just want, on the options for the future, one of the things that we've been saying to our stakeholders for the last year or two is that don't worry, we've got the next 5 years covered. The capacity is coming online to meet the growth, so you customers out there that are expanding your operations, don't worry about it. And as far as the future goes, we're keeping an eye on the future. We haven't made decisions, we haven't made big bets on the future yet. We don't think we need to yet, but as James just said, at some point we will have to make a decision, and that point is somewhere down the road, and we're certainly working on that. So SaskPower, we have over 2,600 employees, 467,000 customers, which in some parts of the world doesn't sound like very many, but to us it keeps us busy, about $5 billion in assets. SaskPower was formed in 1929, so we're quite a well-established old institution. And one of the things I like to say is we're not quite as old as the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, but we're kind of almost as well known as they are. Our mission: safe, reliable, sustainable power for our customers. I I think I could be safe in saying that that's really been our mission statement as long as SaskPower has been in existence. And other things come and go and policies change, but that fundamental purpose has remained and as I think always will remain. So a little bit about our power system. We have 3 coal-fired power stations. That's sort of the foundation of our electricity production. I think the brochure, I noticed the fact sheet said 70% of our electricity comes from coal. And actually that's a little bit out of date, because it's not that we're actually burning less coal, or we're probably producing a bit more from coal than we used to, but as a percentage, because of the growth in our system, we're now around about 55% from coal. We've got hydroelectric power, 6 natural gas stations, 2 wind facilities, and we've got power purchase agreements with wind, cogeneration, and heat recovery projects. So what is the future? The short-term outlook for SaskPower is growth in demand that we've not ever experienced before. About 2008, early 2008, we updated our load forecast, and we were looking at annual growth of about 3% per year for the next 10 years. So our system growing by about 1/3 at the same time as a lot of our infrastructure is reaching end of life. So we do have a big challenge ahead. This picture is intended to show that the biggest component of that growth is industrial load. So the big chunk of black there in the stacked bar chart is our industrial power sector. And I've got a slide that illustrates that a bit more later. So going from something like, I think the numbers here, 18,000 gigawatt hours of consumption in 2008 will be up to 25,000 gigawatt hours by the end of the decade. So now my colleague Phil Sanham, who's on the gas side of our gas crown, asked a question about transportation. I was really happy that he asked that question, because transportation is a big issue on the electricity side as well. So we're a big territory. So this is a map of Saskatchewan with our major transmission lines on it. You can see the south half of the province is where most of the development has been. The north half is where the uranium mining is, and a lot of growth happening there as well. But I just want to point out the large territory, and one of the things I had an opportunity to visit UK recently, and we do have one of our guests from UK here. So if you just imagine the south, the bottom left corner of this map is the very southern tip of southern England, and the upper right corner is the northeast tip of Scotland. So the UK fits right inside of Saskatchewan, so that's how big we are geographically. We also have something in common with Japan. Japan, I think square kilometer-wise, are about the same as Saskatchewan. Japan has 120 million people. We have just over 1 million people. So it's an interesting challenge in terms of population density, in terms of the distances that we have to move electricity to get it from where it's supplied to where the customers use it. So a little illustration of where the areas of rapid growth, and just generally speaking. So there's where the uranium development is in the province, huge potential. Potash, everybody's hopefully has heard about potash by now. That's generally where you find potash in Saskatchewan. And everywhere in that area there's some kind of development, either existing mines expanding or new mines likely to come on stream. Pipelines running through the province, oil and gas pipelines, that's generally where you find them. So that's increased demand for electricity for pumping stations and compression. We've even got a possible diamond mine in that part of the province. Here's oil. I probably haven't got that quite right, but generally speaking, that's where all the oil development is. I'm told in the southeast corner of Saskatchewan, where the Bakken play is, annual growth rates of about 6%, 6 to 10% per year, just in that region. As terms of renewable energy, just kind of obviously you have to put the power plants where the water is in the case of hydro. So there's 3 potential sites that we're looking at. And wind energy, that's where the wind blows in Saskatchewan. The wind blows everywhere in Saskatchewan, but in terms of the sweet spot for getting the most economical use of wind, that's generally where people will be looking, and there is a lot of potential. So natural gas generation, just a bit about that. We are adding quite a bit of generation. We have about 700 megawatts being installed in the process that we've added or we will be installing. So between 2009 and 2013, we'll brought on 680 megawatts of natural gas generation. In terms of coal, as I mentioned, coal has been our bread and butter, our foundation of electricity supply. We're very optimistic about the potential for it would be the world's first integrated carbon capture and sequestration demonstration project. So that's the Boundary Dam Power Station, which is down in the southeast corner of Saskatchewan near Estevan. But the Boundary Dam plant just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and Unit 3 at Boundary Dam will be 45 years of age in 2014, I believe. The plan is to life extend that unit, get another 30 years of reliable operation from it, and on the back end tack on a carbon capture facility, and the CO2 would be sold to oil companies to be used for enhanced oil recovery. And the business case is quite sound for that. The economics work partly because of revenue from CO2 sales for enhanced oil recovery. Wind, we are in the process of adding 200 megawatts of wind. That'll bring us up to about 400 megawatts, which will take us up to about 8.5% of our system will be made up from wind. And generally speaking, then people I've talked to around North America, 10% is getting to be pretty much the limit. And I've got a couple slides that will illustrate why that is right now. That's my time. The hook's not coming out yet?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. We are working, as I think mentioned earlier, we do a lot of work in the area of demand-side management and efficiency and energy conservation. So we've got a stated goal that we're going to reduce demand by 100 megawatts from where it otherwise would have occurred. So a lot of work going on in that regard. By the way, this illustration here of the old fridge, our folks came out with a competition, called it the Ugly Old Fridge Contest. And if you had an old 1970s vintage fridge in your basement that was not very efficient, you could turn it in and get a rebate. I can't remember exactly what it was. Of course, many of us, when we buy a new fridge, we take the old fridge, put it downstairs, and that's where we keep the beer. So, and Carmen mentioned that earlier this morning. That's one of the fundamental goals of keep your house warm, keep your beer cold. The other thing that our demand-side management folks are working on, which I think is quite exciting, is an energy conservation potential study. And that's not mentioned on the slide here, but hopefully we'll get the results of that sometime this year. And that will tell us sort of what's a practical, how much there's a theoretical potential for energy conservation and efficiency. And in fact, you know, in theory, you could do a lot of things, but in practice, what do we think people are likely to do? So there's the technology side, there's the economic side, and then there's sort of the practical, what are people willing to do? How are we willing to change our habits? And I think our habits are a big driver for how we all use electricity. Adding renewables, we do have something we call the Green Options Power Program, and a target of up to 50 megawatts each year. Just to put that into perspective, 50 megawatts might not sound like much, but our system, SaskPower system, our peak demand is just over 3,200 megawatts. So when we talk about 50 megawatts or 100 megawatts, it's a pretty significant component to our system. And some of the types of energy that we're looking at, we're getting heat recovery from pipelines, we're getting biomass, we're getting small run-of-river hydro, getting small wind, and that's the type of thing that's coming on through that program. And now, as an old operations guy, I'd like to just kind of talk a little bit about this and just remind you that electricity is it's an interesting type of commodity in that you actually have to produce the product at the same instant that the order is placed. In fact, almost the same instant that someone gets the idea that they might want to go shopping for something. If you imagine going to the grocery store and thinking, I'm going to buy a box of cereal. So at the exact instant that you reach for the box of cereal, a factory somewhere has to produce that box of cereal. And it's transported to you that immediately. So when you go and flip on that light switch, that's exactly what happens all across anywhere and every electricity system. So the time from production to consumption is almost zero. Engineers and physicists would argue with that point. It's actually not instantaneous, but it's close enough to it. And so, and electricity really, for the most part, can't be stored. We can store water and we can store compressed air and things like that, but the electrons, you know, practically speaking, you can't store them. Batteries are just too small and too expensive to be used on a large scale in a power system. So this is illustrated. This is our demand profile. I believe this was actually what happened in 2009, and you can see that the big area in the bottom where I've called it base. That's our coal production. So that's our base load. Really illustrates the need that you've got to keep flexibility in your generation profile. You need the base load stuff that runs consistently day in, day out, and you need some plants that are going to come on and come off. For example, between the wee hours of the morning and the peak hour of the day, which is usually around supper time, the demand for power will double. So the operators have to be able to bring plants on and shut them down daily to manage that, and they have to be able to count on them. The peak demand that you see there over on the right-hand side, that's typically around December 20th, usually around between 5 and 6 p.m. And in Saskatchewan, on a December 20th, you quite often, what you expect to see is, well, it's still dark when you come home from work. It could be minus 40, or if it's not minus 40, then you're forecast to be minus 40 by the time you wake up in the morning. So the first thing you do when you come home, you plug your car in, and I have a story about plug-in vehicles I want to share with you in just a second. But you plug your car in, you go in and you start cooking supper, you crank up the heat, and so that's when the peak demand for power occurs. So in our part of the world here, minus 40 is quite possible, and I've lived through many minus 40 days, and I've also seen plus 40 in the summertime. So you've got both of those extremes that you have to plan for. And there's just a story, when all of my career has been with SaskPower except 2 years with Ontario Hydro, and I moved there and I finished university. I went to look for an apartment, and the landlord, one of the places I looked, I said, well, can I park my car here? He said, well, sure. I said, can I plug my car in? He said, well, why would you want to do that? And I thought, oh, okay, I'm not in Saskatchewan anymore. This was in the southern Ontario area, where they don't quite get the same kind of cold weather as we do here. And so the whole idea of the plug-in electric car, it has a whole new meaning now. And then, sorry, just see if I can back up. Yeah, so if you look at that peak period on the right-hand side, you see how that lines up. And this is our total wind generation for that same time. It's on the same time scale. So if you look there on the right-hand side, it's pretty sparse in that period where we had our peak demand. So the point of this is that wind energy, we do have a lot of wind in Saskatchewan, but contrary to popular belief, it does not blow all of the time. So it blows about 40%. On average, you get about 40% of the capacity. So if you have 100 megawatts of wind capacity, you get about 40 megawatts equivalent. Emerging supply gap, and this is just looking into the future. You can see that if our aging infrastructure, if our old plants were to retire, and when they reach end of life and we're not able to convert them to carbon capture and sequestration, this is what the gap would look like. We've got a midterm plan, and we're kind of looking at options out into the future. I just got the 3-minute warning here, so I'm just going to zip through this. We've got a number of options that we're considering. It's already been talked about. Yeah, we've got options, and at some point in time we have to stop talking about options and we have to actually pull the trigger on something. And then in the very long term, we add to the list of options. We start to add in nuclear does start to come into the consciousness. large hydro, and potentially import. And we are looking at nuclear. We're keeping an eye on the technology. We're indifferent to technology. We would be looking at, obviously, economic considerations would be a big one, reliability considerations. And we're keeping a watch on the potential development of the small plants that are in the 300 megawatt range. And just to close with some of the current realities going forward, coal has been the foundation of our energy supply for 50 years. Foundation of the future will have to meet new environmental criteria. That's obvious, and we'll have to have a higher cost than the current legacy systems. We've got a big challenge ahead of us with rebuilding the infrastructure and keeping up with growth. And customer expectations for reliability, affordability, and sustainability continue to increase. And this last slide here, I borrowed this from the Canadian Electricity Association. They talk about the 3 pillars of energy, and it's reliability, sustainability, and affordability, and you all wrap that in an envelope and call it social license or social acceptability. Visited the UK not too long ago. They talk about the energy trilemma, and it's actually the same three words, but that's what they call it. All right, thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Guy and others. I want to have a chat at lunch, Guy, if we can, about the wind power project. I noticed this morning there's a spot of vacant land that's just about exactly halfway between the legislature and the university. And I thought, there's potential there. So we could see. So we have some questions. We have a few minutes for questions, 15 minutes or so. And as I mentioned, we're going to be recording this, so I'd like you to use the microphones. And we're going to have a video coverage so the world can see you. So I'm also going to limit, because we had to limit the speakers to 20 minutes, I'm going to limit your preambles to no more than a minute. I think that's fair. But please, we already have one, so go ahead.
Thank you for your talks. They were quite interesting. My name is Lisa White, and I'm doing my PhD at the University of Saskatchewan in integrating sustainability principles into energy policy planning. So my question for all of the speakers is, okay, the quick question is, what's your view on sustainability? And what does that entail? So for example, I'll frame that a little bit. For example, in the States, a few states use things like reliability, affordability, energy efficiency. There's the UK stance. They just developed national policy strategy that includes, some of Bob Gibson's principles of intergenerational equity and sustainable livelihoods. And then you also have the triple bottom line model of trying to balance social, economic, environmental considerations. And often the environment or certain trade-offs are made and certain things get left out. So again, I'll come back to my question. How do each of you see sustainability being integrated into energy policy in the future? Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. What happened? Oh, you're over there. Sorry. I guess what I would say is I prefer to use sustainable development. And so I link sustainability to sustainable development and sustainable energy in the same way. And that's because there's quite a big discourse about what sustainable development is. And I think that there are a number of things, and I think that the basic idea is clear, but it's what I would call an essentially contested concept. So for me, sustainable development it's a political concept. So it's a lot like justice, liberty, equality, freedom, democracy. We know what those things are, and we can say what are some of the principles of democracy and so on. But having said that frames our debate, but it doesn't solve the particular problems about what should your electoral system be or whatever. I'm using the democracy example. So in sustainable development, I think it's the same thing. It refers, we know the broad areas. It deals with both intergenerational justice and justice within a generation. It tells us we should pay attention to the environment and to the Earth's life support systems and so on and so on and so on. But it doesn't in any clear way. There's no clear way to go from that to say, yes, Saskatchewan should build a nuclear power plant, yes or no. Because you need to bring in, as well as some ethical principles or whatever you want to call them, normative principles, you need to bring in a whole series of concrete arguments about, well, how much would that cost? Is it safe? And always in energy, the key thing, what is the alternative? Because no choices in energy are made in the abstract, because you have both the production and the consumption side. So one choice might be, well, we'll consume a little less and we won't build another power plant. Or if it's building a power plant, then there are many different ways you can go. And is it centralized or decentralized? And those things I really think, so in a way, I'm not trying to avoid your question. I think there are things that sustainable development makes quite clear. But still, you have to actually argue about and look at the actual concrete effect of those. And so if I was saying, how does it relate to sustainable development? It includes economic, environmental, and social dimensions. None of them can be left out or completely sacrificed to the other. And now I've started running on, I can't resist saying this, there is a kind of approach to sustainable development which I think is not helpful, which basically says this: sustainable development is about development. We've got to make compromises and sacrifice sometimes, and I agree that that's true. But then finally you say, well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So, you know, bugger the environment. We got the other 2, so you can't complain. I don't think it works that way, and it doesn't work if you try and forget the economy either, because that doesn't work. So you have to try and find some win-wins. Maybe you have to make some trade-offs too. Bob Gibson, I know, thinks that you can always have win-wins. Maybe he's a bit optimistic.
Maybe I'll just add a couple of things. The first one, whenever people develop policy, they often forget about the people. They develop a policy for the what, but they forget literally to engage people. So I fully agree with my colleague here that it's important to talk about economy, environment, and society, which I think is often forgotten. And because of that, you know, we often talk about affordability, accessibility, sustainability, but we never talk about acceptability, which for me is linked with the social aspect. So you can make a difference with your PhD.
I don't have too much to add to that, other than I would say don't forget about the reliability. And I think the social acceptability piece is that to me, that's what do people want? You know, what does the public want the electric utility to do? And do they and some days if you ask them, all they care about is just keep the price down. And so then it's all about economics, it's all about lowest cost. Sometimes they'll say, well, it's economic development. And then sometimes they'll say, well, I really care about the environment. And so really it's all of the above. And so how do you balance that? And I don't think you can ever ignore anyone. I agree with that.
Hello, my name is Jose Condor. I'm doing my studies in the Johnson Shoyama School and also working for IPAC CO2. I have a question for Mr. Bruce, and it's regarding to the commitment the government of Saskatchewan made to the federal government in order to reduce 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions until the year 2020. I was wondering if you have any idea how much is going to cost this new form of tax to every person living in Saskatchewan for in our bills in SaskPower? Thank you.
I don't think I have an answer to that question. I know that there is a target. Government of Saskatchewan has a stated target of 20% reduction in CO2 emissions overall, and that includes all aspects of it's everything. It's not just electricity, although electricity is, I think electricity is, I don't know, something like 15 to 20% of the total CO2 emissions in the province. I don't have exact numbers. Transportation is big, agriculture is big. So in terms of the big picture, what that will cost us, I wouldn't be able to answer that. In terms of, I mean, it's a big challenge. I mean, everywhere you go, you hear about targets, and it's a directional thing, I believe. And you know, we're starting down the path, and we're doing things like, for example, trying to determine if carbon capture and sequestration is commercially viable. I mean, that's one step. That's one step on the path to converting coal fleet to a non-emitting source. And I mean, we've got a lot of work to do to be able to get moving down that path.
Peter Phillips from the school in Saskatoon. I have a question, because if I was to characterize the three talks, you know, really in 2 words or less: educate, dialogue, rational planning. Where's the market? Where's the buyers and sellers, not only of the goods and services that embed this stuff, but the people who are producing the products, and the fact that we're not an island, we're part of a continental energy system. How does the market relate to each of your models of making choices about the goals for the 21st century?
In fact, for us, in our main exhibition at Science and Tech, it's Power to Choose. So it's all about market. That was quick. Yes. It says it all.
Yeah. Well, I think when you know, when you say where is the market, certainly when we're doing our projections for demand for electricity looking forward, there's a lot of intelligence gathered about, you know, economic forecasts about what different industry sectors are doing. You know, what are their plans for expansion? We have people going out and talking to individual customers in the different sectors. And then on the supply side, of course, would be things like what's the labor outlook look like? What's the supply and demand for people to do all of the work? That's one thing we have in common with, for example, Saskatchewan Mining Association is doing a huge amount of work in that, because we all are competing for the same skilled people. Market prices, what are future market prices going to be for the different fuels that we're going to use for natural gas, for example. So I think it's embedded in the processing and the planning processes would be what I would say.
Yeah, I was talking about an energy transition, or transitions that we're going over in coming decades. I think definitely markets have a key role to play in developing technologies and implementing those technologies. Markets are extremely powerful tools. There's some things that markets don't do so well. I mean, one example, I think, is the example of carbon markets. We talked in the first session about the importance of a price for carbon. Absolutely true. If carbon was $30 a ton or $300 a ton, it would change the behavior of companies, and markets would become a powerful force for implementing low carbon technologies. But markets don't give themselves a price for carbon. It's a political planning decision, a regulatory decision that sets up that market. In that sense, it's a created market. So I think that when we're thinking about these energy transitions, markets will do enormous amount in bringing them about. But on the other hand, it will be decisions by voters and governments and planning agencies that set in place the context within which private companies can have an incentive to deliver exactly those things that they do best. Historically, if we look at some of the big transitions in say, transportation technology or energy or communications technologies, markets typically played a critical role in realizing these transitions. Yet very often the state also played an important role. Building railroads, private companies may have done a lot of the building, but someone had to give powers to expropriate land, particularly for large infrastructure projects where return is delayed more than 20 years. You can't find private operators who'll do it unless someone guarantees the loans. Every company that's built a major undersea tunnel, for instance, or canal, like the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, the English-French tunnel, the first investors, and in some cases the second investors, all went bust. It's the person who bought up the loans at the end who made the money from those things. So state involvement is critical as well.
Time for one more quick question.
Hi, my name is Sean Augustine. I'm with the Ministry of Tourism, Parks, Culture and Sport, so I have no relation to the energy sector at all. So this might be a bit of a naive question, but it's for Dr. Meadowcroft. You said earlier about integration is important but can only be achieved iteratively. Are you suggesting that this could be done on a sector-by-sector basis, like oil and gas, electricity, different types of energy production? Or is this that it would all be working simultaneously, and then, and as you achieve new different types of technology, different type of transmission systems, different improvements, that you would review sort of periodically?
I guess the answer is kind of both in a way. I think you can achieve some things by planning processes, either bottom up or top down. I think there are other things that are achieved by historical processes. I mean, take an example, the question about electrifying transport. So we're talking about shifting the burden of transport fuels onto the electricity system. Now, obviously, that would take place perhaps over a decade, several decades. We don't know if it's going to happen. But thinking that it might happen surely has to kind of be a concern for your guys' long-term and medium-term planning. So some things we can integrate consciously, other things we can't even possibly think about exactly, or the uncertainties are too great, and we'll have to deal with them in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time or whatever. So I guess I'm saying that we're embarking on a process, a complex and interactive process, that not just a one-shot deal.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and one thing I forgot to mention is that our long-term planning process, we're going to be working towards extending the time horizon and looking out to something like 2050, and more of an outlook, and looking at some of these scenarios and trying to illustrate what some of these scenarios might look like. For example, if everyone switched to electric cars, what might that look like?
I'd like to ask our speakers if they have one sentence they'd like to add, anything to sum up your statements for today.
I think energy can be the next railway, and it can literally unite and change our country forever. The choice is ours.
I'm all right. I'll go with that one.
You're allowed to use each other's, yes.
Just like it's a very complex business. It's very complex. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much, Guy, James, Denise, very much for these thoughtful presentations. You've given us a lot to take away with us today, and we appreciate very much your comments. Thank you, folks, for coming.